Here we have our first land use model, the concentric ring model, the earliest one that has these concentric zones or rings coming outward from the center of increasing affluence or wealth. And so essentially the farther you get away from the bullseye or the center, the more affluent the population is. Very importantly, this is a pattern that you see more pronounced in cities that grew up way before the automobile. So you look at the oldest cities in the United States. You look at some of the big ones there on the East Coast and in the Midwest. What happened there was they grew quite quickly, but they grew in the 1700s, 1800s, before the automobile. And so the concentric ring model in those cities is very apparent, very noticeable. In the case of Indianapolis, you can definitely see evidence of the concentric ring model. For example, the Central Business District downtown. But one of the things you'll note is our city, Indianapolis, grew up later in the 1900s, after World War II, more recently. So in the case of Indianapolis, you see the concentric ring model, but it's not as dominant, it's not as evident as it is in these older cities here, where you can see the share of the housing is much older, much more likely to be before World War II. One assumption built into all of these models is the fact that they're on a wide open flat area of just wide open growth, and these rings can go outward in all different directions. That's definitely not the case when we add in physical features or barriers. And so Burgess, he actually came up with the concentric ring model in Chicago. And so what he did was he realized this pattern was, of course, obstructed by the big old Lake Michigan there on the right-hand side, illustrated by the big blue glob. Case of Denver. Denver is bordered on the western edge of the city by the Rocky Mountains and the foothills of the mountains. So essentially that's going to prevent the concentric ring growth going outward because there's a physical barrier there. And so that's all I'm illustrating right here is the fact that we can throw in some physical features and barriers, but we still see nonetheless the concentric ring model play itself out. Even in Indianapolis, we see this particular pattern. So although I said it's not something we're going to see, overwhelmingly dominating our urban form, our urban structure, but like we said beforehand, these are layers. So that earliest layer we can see, as far as the homes that were built before 1939, we can see it's in that inner core. So here are the 9 counties of metropolitan Indianapolis, and in the center we can see Indianapolis had by far the largest percentage of housing units that was built before 1939, before the automobile became overwhelmingly widely used, and that was really after World War II. In the case of Indianapolis, by far, the legacy of the concentric ring model that still we notice today is the role in the origin of the Central Business District, and so downtown Indy. So this has been said in the text as the most visually distinctive, the most accessible location you'd find in a metropolitan area. And that is evidence here. So this is something called the sites map. So what they do is they essentially locate where every single photo is taken and then uploaded onto social media, uploaded onto Twitter, because that has a specific latitude and longitude that identifies its location. And so this is now essentially a heat map. So the places that are the most photographed are in yellow, and the places not as photographed as much are somewhere in the purples. So the hottest areas is where we're going to see a lot of photos being taken. And you can clearly see that that's dead smack right in the middle of Indianapolis, where we find the Central Business District. There's a few other clusters of areas. In particular, you'll see Speedway. And that makes sense because that is the #1 tourist attraction in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. To further bring home the concentric ring model, which once again we see its evidence, but its evidence is most clearly closer to the Central Business District. Just kind of add in the layers, the concentric rings, as I kind of see it. I mean, this isn't perfect. These models, once again, aren't perfect, but they do a good job of explaining the general patterns. And so these are these increasing zones of affluence as we get further away from the Central Business District. Here you'll note that this isn't something you're going to see all across the entire metropolitan area. The concentric ring model is something that's very much focused on areas inside Interstate 465, the big loop that goes around our city. So we think about this particular pattern, it's going to be most noticed the closer you are to downtown. In all of the land use patterns, you're going to see this particular concept, this particular idea. But we're definitely going to introduce this so we can understand it here in the concentric ring model. And this is a term called invasion and succession. I'm not the one that came up with the term. This was made up a long time ago, but nonetheless, this explains a very real pattern that we see. The moral of the story is what we have a new immigrant group who might move into an area. An immigrant doesn't mean so much international, just a new group that moves into a particular zone. So once again, these are different zones of affluence. So it's someone that's coming from a lower income area moves into an outer ring. So what happens then is this is going to trigger chain migration. The people who are living in that zone already see these new migrants moving in. They're going to be like, uh-oh, look at all these low-income individuals. In other ways, it might be perceived, look at these different racial groups, look at these different ethnic groups, look at these different religious groups, what have you. And so this is a term called invasion and succession. It's kind of this chain reaction that causes a group to then move to an outer zone, an outer affluence. And so it kind of triggers this out-migration from the central city core that I will talk about a little bit later on in a different chapter. But this is a term called invasion and succession, and it triggers a chain reaction, which I'll further clarify right now. And so this kind of uses as an example. So we have a new migrant move in. So let's say the purple people, they move into zone 2. Over time, they get a little bit of wealth. They have a steady job. They want to move out to a better area. They want to have a nicer home, a newer home, what have you. And so what they do is they then move out to zone 3. So then those people in zone 3 say, uh-oh, here come the purple people. So then they're what's called them the blue people. So then they're the blue people, and they're like, oh no, this neighborhood's going down. The purple people are coming, we're going to move. So then they essentially move out to the next ring. So those people there, we'll call them the pink people. So the pink people are there, and they see all these new people moving in. They're like, uh-oh, that's it, we're moving out. So then they move out. So essentially what happens is then the people that are the wealthy people living out in the way out in these satellite cities, way out in the green area here, they're going to say, we've got these people moving in, this invasion and succession situation happening, we're going to move further out from the central business district. And so it essentially triggers this chain reaction of out-migration, especially of different groups.